Sin duda alguna es una gran oportunidad que tenemos este día de platicar con el productor y los directores del filme Awake, la vida de Paramahansa Yogananda, que gracias al trabajo, el esfuerzo de todos ellos y de muchas personas más durante varios años y visitando más de 30 países alrededor del mundo, tenemos la oportunidad ahora de conocer este producto final. Así que, pues, personalmente estoy muy agradecido por tener esta oportunidad para todo el público latino de habla hispana de platicar con los productores y, por supuesto, directores de este espacio. Peter Ryder, Lisa Lehman y Paola Di Florio, te doy un fuerte abrazo y saludo. Thank you for this great opportunity to talk with the Spanish-speaking audience. How are you guys?
We're great.
Gracias.
Gracias mucho.
It's a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to talk since I'm now in Ranchi and we're doing this video conference. And I would like to begin this interview talking about how do you receive the news of this notice, you know, this idea of you were making the film of such an important and transcendent spiritual personage in the world.
Who wants to begin?
You.
I would say that it wasn't that we just received it. There was a whole process of meeting with filmmakers. So Self-Realization Fellowship met with filmmakers in Los Angeles, different teams, and it was a long process. And we were considered as one of the potential teams. But when we got the news that we were actually making the film, we were both incredibly excited and also terrified because it was such a big responsibility, and we knew that it was going to mean really a journey, and we didn't really know what that was going to be.
And just,
you know, it just is wonderful.
Yeah, tell me, because I imagined also when you received the news that you were going to be part of this team, it was a lot of ideas coming to your mind.
A lot of ideas. We spent hours and hours and hours talking. It's a wonderful challenge to try and figure out how to convey the Dharma, the great wisdom teachings, through cinematic experience. So the film's not informational, but that it's experiential. And that took a while to figure out.
I think also, we also spent, you know, there was a method that we followed, which was to first immerse ourselves in the teachings of Yogananda. So we really spent about 6 months reading as much as we can, just absorbing as much as we can of his books. So clearly the autobiography of a yogi and man's eternal quest, his writings on the Bhagavad Gita, on the Bible. It was a lot. It was a lot to take in. We were overwhelmed a little bit.
One thing that's amazing about Yogananda is he has an enormous amount of first-person writing where he says, this is my experience. I went and did this. I did this. I was looking for my guru. And his writing is very vivid and alive. And so at a certain point we realized, of course, Yogananda needs to narrate his own movie, because where do you have this richness of this experience of a you know, an amazing individual like this? So that was a big breakthrough for us to sort of make that decision to make him be the narrator.
I think also he, in our readings, we recognize that the parts of his stories where he was young, where he was searching and seeking and trying to really find his relationship with God, that was the part that we really felt was important to somehow communicate to an audience. Because our mission was not to make an audience for devotees, but to make an audience that included devotees, but went beyond to the world. And so, you know, a lot of people around the world are in that state of still seeking and searching, and even people that have a religion may not necessarily feel like they know God. And so for us, it was really about connecting with that story. He was the perfect protagonist for this story.
That's true. And also one important part, it was to select the characters that it was going to be part of this documentary. How did you do that? Because it was so many people that you could interview, but you select, I think, one of the best person that you could talk, right?
Thank you.
You're talking about the interviewees, or are you talking about the actors that were playing?
No, the
interviewees.
Interviewees. Lisa, do you want to take that?
I would say, in some ways, you know, we're both all three of us are very experienced filmmakers, but the big lesson here, I think, creatively was learning to get out of our own way and to really meditate and channel, become a channel. And so we were operating a lot on intuition and letting things come forward to us. And Paola, what would you say?
I think as far as the interviews, that is it's so true what Lisa said. I think that, however, in order to really get people to watch a film, especially if you're having people watch a film about an Indian mystic, you know, something that it's hard to get people into movie theaters. So there's a lot of competition, you know, it's very hard to book a theater. So we really tried to get people of stature that could speak of Yogananda. And what we discovered, so we did, you know, we got a professor of theology at Harvard, we went to Deepak Chopra, we went to a physicist and a physician who taught at Harvard and also at MIT.
Krishna Das, right? Big bhakti.
And we also went to people that had a popular following, like Krishna Das.
And also there were archival interviews, you know, with George Harrison, who was, you know, very, very devoted to Yogananda, and Ravi Shankar, and some other people, you know, a lot of people in the late 60s and early 70s, for them, that Yogananda was their doorway, their point of entry into Eastern mysticism. And so many people read that book, including Steve Jobs, you know, who we mentioned in the film too. That was one of his favorite books. He read it once a year. So we needed these points of entry to entice outsiders to say, oh, if these people think that Yogananda has something to say, I want to pay attention now, you know.
Because the real knowledge of Yogananda actually was the scholars at Self-Realization Fellowship had a tremendous amount of knowledge about what happened throughout the years certainly in establishing his organization in America. And so we were very lucky in being able to interview, and really the doors were open to us at Self-Realization Fellowship. But we really went beyond that as well. We really wanted to know, what does the world know about Yogananda, and how did he influence people like George Harrison and these other figures? So I think the timing of when the film came out ended up being perfect, even though for us it was a little bit torturous because it took forever to make the film. But the timing was such where even Steve Jobs' death really brought a lot of attention to the autobiography of a yogi, being the seminal book that he gave out to people in his at his funeral.
In memorial.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, when you have all this information and you need to travel to different countries and begin filming, at the end you have an amount of footage and you need to select what is convenient to show. How was that process of editing? How was the process of the final step before you were going to screen it?
Long.
Lisa, do you want to start?
I mean, it was complicated. We went through many versions, and once we had decided that it should, of course, be told in Yogananda's voice, that was a big breakthrough for us. And then it was a matter of whittling down in very long assemblies and focusing them more and more. You know, I think we thought initially we could tell a larger social history, but of course the guru's own personal story was so amazing that it took over. And one of the joys, like going off what Paola said, of this sort of balance of interviewing people around the world, but also going deep into SRF's archives, was having an opportunity to tell parts of Yogananda's story that many people don't know. You know, traveling in the South, experiencing, I mean, he had, in some cities he'd be handed the keys to the city, but when he got into the South, he experienced a sort of American racism. You know, he compared it to the caste system in India. And, you know, he had a lot of trials and tribulations that he had to conquer beautifully done. Of course, he's a complete role model for us, I believe. But that was actually really a joy to be able to deal with some of that footage. People hadn't seen that footage or didn't know those stories. Paula, do you want to talk about the editing process?
Yeah, I think finding the hero's journey was just perfect with his journey here on Earth. So what we recognized was that, you know, his sort of mission and striving to really find a relationship, a deep relationship, his purpose in life is the mission that we're all on as human beings. So by taking his journey and his hero's journey to do that, and everything that comes in the way to stop him from obtaining that, including betrayals and, you know, a crumbling organization, having to rebuild his organization from scratch again and again. These are all things that I think the blows that he had to face, those were the things that we realized helped our audience connect to his humanity. And I think for me personally, you know, I think for all of us in our own separate ways came to this, we really treasure this one moment where, you know, everything really is going wrong for him, and his best friend does betray him and takes away half of the organization. And at that point, there was really, he was really burnt out.
He goes to Mexico. He goes to Mexico.
And he goes to Mexico to find solace.
Because Mexico reminds him of India, the warmth, the culture, the climate, and he goes there and he just communes, he meditates, you know, at a lake for weeks and weeks, and, you know, he says he's ready to go away and disappear and give up on the organization. And of course, that's when he gets a calling from God, from Divine Mother, saying, nope, nope, you've got to go back. You have to finish what you started. And he has to go back to Los Angeles, what he used to call the jungle of civilization. So in Yogananda's teachings, that's what's so sort of great and actually very useful about it, is he says it's easy to go off to the Himalayas and be a hermit in a cave, you know, and find God that way. What's much more challenging is to find God in the jungle of civilization.
And I think for as filmmakers, this was very personally, it resonated with me, because even making this film was so challenging. How to tell the story of this guru was, and the pressures of doing it right and all of that for this audience that was waiting for the film. And I think that there were many times where it just felt like, where are we going? How are we going to do this? And this particular moment kind of opened up a lot of doors. And I think what it was where did he go? He went, yes, he went to Mexico, but where he went is he went into silence. He went into that place where he always goes to get all of his answers. And that's what I felt at that point in time. That's what I was doing. I stopped reading all of Yogananda, and I just started meditating. Like the research that we were doing eventually led to the practice. And in doing the practice, the answers of how to actually get through this process started to come. So he was our teacher even in terms of the filmmaking. He helped us make the film.
We considered giving Yogananda a directing credit.
Actually,
it was an interesting process of both external and internal research, you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I was talking earlier today with Swami Sriyananda Giri here in Ranchi, and he was saying something I think is very special. When you read the book, Autobiography of a Yogi, you always find something different every time that you read it. And he was saying that with this film, it's something similar. You see it one time and you see something, but then the next time that you see it, you will feel something different. So I think, obviously, Yogananda was working through you guys, and I would like to ask you, Lisa, Paula, and of course Peter, about how did it change in a professional way, but also in a personal way, doing this film?
Paula, would you like to start?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, you know, I think we all had different relationships to that word God. And speaking for myself, you know, I had a troubled relationship with the word God, and I would find, I'm a long-time meditator, but I would find I would have reactions to that. And, you know, Yogananda was all about God. And working on this film, doing the practices, the research, the readings, it really helped me reconnect to that word and understand a much broader sense of what that might mean. And it's really calmed me down that way. So that's really just an enormously profound change for me. And so helpful for something I'd struggled with for maybe 20, 30 years.
Great. For you?
I think for me it was, I didn't know that I was looking. At the time that I was making this film, I couldn't have said to you, I'm looking for a guru. I'm looking for a teacher. I know now, by looking back, that I was looking my whole life. And I think that I was open. I think I was open and I was seeking, but I was stuck in that place where I couldn't get beyond my intellect. I'd had a couple of experiences, so I knew that that wasn't where it is, but I couldn't really, I had not found a way to always come back, always come back, always come back. And I think that this film and reading Yogananda and his teachings and practicing his teachings has just completely changed my life. Because it doesn't matter what I'm doing, whether I'm working professionally, whether I'm being a mother to my 2 boys, or a wife, or you know, partner to various people in my lives, a daughter, whatever it is, I'm just always coming from, I always go back to home base. And home base is probably a richer, more adventurous, that word ever new that I always heard the SRF people saying, ever new, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, what is ever new? That is such a great way of putting it, because it's inexhaustible. So it's the inexhaustible home that I can come back to. And so any time that I'm starting anything, a new venture, a new morning, you know, a new way of looking and approaching something, I'm always coming back to that place. So that place is what I have gained from making this film.
Beautiful. And for you, Peter?
Well, I wanted to add, you know, all of us had a hatha yoga practice. In fact, Lisa had done teacher training, so, you know, we were very versed in the physical postures. And so many of the people who practice, you know, worldwide, and certainly in America, think that that is yoga, that the physical practice is yoga. But in fact, it's just one component of a whole sort of lifestyle, which includes karma and service and study and all sorts of things. And, you know, I also had a mindfulness practice. I was meditating in sort of a more Buddhist tradition, which is just this idea of just paying attention to what is now, what is now, what is now. Now, in this tradition, in this yoga, Raja yoga tradition, which is the meditative, the bigger yoga, there's one more component in there that's really quite fascinating, and I'm still exploring, which is this idea of devotion. So what arises for you in that practice? Something. Is it a feeling? Is it a picture? Is it whatever it is, well, cultivate a relationship with it. Bow to it and see what happens. Bow and come back. And there's something incredibly mysterious and actually interesting, scary, and fascinating about that I'm still exploring.
Beautiful. And also something that maybe you find out very interesting is you find the teachings in SRF in Los Angeles, and you come also to India for this trip for making the film. And you were in Ranchi, you were in different cities, and here it was where Yogananda started everything, right? So how did you find Yogoda Satsanga Society helping you, and also the devotees here, the East and West combined with this energy? I see some, what happened? Tell me, Paul.
Well, I'm just remembering, it's so incredible.
It was life-changing. It was life-changing. Lisa had been to India on other films. Twice, Lisa, you had been? Yes, so she was a veteran of India. We were in total culture shock. In fact, as sort of the lead producer, the logistics person, we had this crazy ambitious schedule, of trains, planes, automobiles, equipment, going here, going there, and the monks just looked at each other and said, boy, these guys are in for a big lesson, how things happen in India,
But I think Ranchi is a great starting off point, because when we arrived in Ranchi, it was not the first place we went to. We started in Calcutta. But when we went to Ranchi and we took the train, from Calcutta to Ranchi, all of us with all of our bags and all of our people were in the train. And we arrived and we walked on the grounds. Everything just was like, everything just settled. And then we walked and we were being led to the veranda where all of the monks were waiting, and the brahmacharis and everybody were waiting for us with their hands like pranaming to us. And it was such a sight, like I just never saw anything like that. We felt so deeply welcomed, and really deeply welcomed. And I think that is, in essence, that is what India as a whole was. It was a welcoming on a level that I had personally never experienced before, having not been to India. But also, I think being with this particular, with YSS and with the teachings, the ashrams of Yogananda ji, which are, it's one of the touch points is that welcoming, that incredible. He was so open with receiving. He was incredible to his guests. That because it was like you're meeting another. You're meeting a divine person. In other words, to treat every single person as though they are an aspect of God. Well, that is something that we felt when we arrived in Ranchi. Yeah.
And also, I would like to ask you, Lisa, because they say that you were in India before. What was the difference between visiting in the other films that you were making and this time?
I think this is a good question. I think there's something very powerful, and I don't think I can really explain it, but there's something very powerful about following the footsteps of the Guru and really being in those very places, being at Dakshineshwar, really where he sat and had experiences of the Divine Mother, being right at that very tree, where at Ranchi, where he taught, his very first How to Live school, and really combined his teachings and really figured out, how to convey these great downloads he was getting from the universe, how to communicate that. And there's just something almost unexplainable about the power of connection when you're really in those physical sites. I found it powerful.
Beautiful. And I think also one important part is obviously when you're making a film, you have a lot of struggles, like his life, So what was for you guys one of the struggles that you had between starting the main idea, during all the process?
How much time do you have?
There's many challenges. It took quite a bit of time to sort of find this movie, or for this movie to find us, as it were. What Lisa said earlier about us getting out of the way, that's part of it. And it's sort of an intuitive process that both Lisa and Paola have done on all their films. But for me, there were a couple of things that were so symbolic, if you will. And I'm going to give you an example. We in India did recreations because we needed to convey what it was like his early life. There were no pictures. There were 3 or 4 pictures of him in his boyhood. We needed to bring that to life. So Paola and Lisa came up with the idea of recreations and casting actors, and we filmed a key recreation of his devotion at the Ghats in Calcutta. Where he would go as a young boy. He would run away from his house. He would go there in the early morning and pray and look for a guru. He's looking for a guru everywhere. Which one of these guys is my guru? Where am I going to find this thing that I'm yearning for? It was a beautiful sequence. We were there at dawn. We had a crane. It was just gorgeous. The next day, one of the people working on the film conveys to me the devastating news that all that footage got erased. It disappeared. We lost that. And we were on a schedule where we could not afford a reshoot. So I had to communicate to the directors that we had lost that sequence. It was heartbreaking, heartbreaking. The story doesn't end. Weeks later, when we got back to LA, somehow on one of the laptops, there was a folder of that footage. Somehow it had not been put on our master drive, it was on the desktop of this computer. So there was a resurrection. And that happened over and over again. We would face these huge deaths like, oh my God, it's over, it's a disaster. And then something would manifest that wanted to express. So
I think that happened in so many different ways in terms of, it really, the process of making the film really did mirror and does mirror in a lot of ways the spiritual practice. In general, because you come against obstacles and your knee-jerk reaction is to try to solve it, you know, with the ways that you know how, right? So you're coming from the solving from the mind. How does my mind want to solve this problem? Or how am I going to create this or that? And the answers very often are not going to come from that place. And so it's the softening, it's the recognition and the softening of that. And I think any creative process really is about this, which is why I kind of believe that any artist is essentially on the spiritual path, whether they admit it or not. It's just that it's the same. It's a softening because they don't. Those answers really are coming from another place, and so it's the listening. It's that deep listening. And that really happened. I mean, I remember going up to Babaji's cave, and poor brother Vishwananda. I mean, he's so amazing. He was so tolerant, you know. It's like all these questions coming from the mind, you know, trying to explain Babaji. Explain Babaji to me. I don't understand. What do you mean a timeless saint? You know, just having to really get answers to some of these things that just are not explainable in time and space. And you know, at a certain point, he was so patient in allowing me to ask all these sort of intellectual questions that had no answers, to the point where instead of telling me there are no answers that I can give you that will be satisfying, he exhausted me. And in my own exhaustion, I just finally had to open up, you know, and so finally, and it's a hard, arduous trip up that mountain to get to this cave. So by the time, with all the questions and everything, and by the time I got to the top, I mean, it was really just about experiencing it. And that is, I think that is really all the challenges that we had, whether it was editors that would really come in and out, and, you know, we did have some terrific collaborators, but the film was challenging. So it was like they'd come in and they'd have to leave, and we would be stuck with, you know, having to figure out our way through. And I think that all of these, whether it was editing or how to bring in that, how to walk that balance between speaking a language that doesn't alienate those who are on this path, but also to use language that people that are not on this path are going to really understand and want to know more about this journey. So that was a very, very fine line to walk.
For you, Lisa?
It's hard to pluck one out. I mean, going on what Paolo said, you know, there's someone in the film, a yoga teacher, who says, imagine Yogananda coming to America in 1920 and, you know, a brown-skinned man in a turban, and to a mainly white Protestant audience, and saying to them, you can find God in your spine. So that sort of leap that you know, he was a brilliant communicator. He understood American audiences, and he understood how to speak to them, and we had that same challenge. You know, we were also dealing with these kind of concepts a lot of people aren't familiar with. And for me, that was the most challenging and the most rewarding, was to find that cinematic language, and, you know, dealing a lot with metaphor and just creating a sense of experience. It was really fun, really hard, and Often the editing, as Paula described, it was a process of discovery. You know, we'd each get in there, sometimes together, sometimes on our own, and we'd just sit there and face that screen, and, you know, one thing takes you to another until you have that aha moment.
Exactly. And when you talk about audience, it's also important to know what was the experience when you released the movie to the first big audience. When was that? How it happened? How did you feel? Because also it was a huge experience.
Well, one thing that was just really resonant and interesting was that in some ways it mimicked the experience that Yogananda himself had when he started talking across the country. So he came in 1920, and a time before radio, before television. So it was actually a very exciting evening to go and see the exotic Swami from India come and talk at the Philharmonic Hall, or the Masonic Temple, or whatever, the meeting hall in the town. He would go from town to town. He was very sort of savvy about marketing himself and, you know, creating posters and having people go in advance, an advance team to set things up. And so, you know, in many places, including in Los Angeles, when he showed up, there were lines around the block. It was just sold out. You know, police had to come in to keep the crowd at bay in Los Angeles. Well, we didn't quite have that experience, but in Seattle, where we premiered the movie at the Seattle Film Festival in May of 2014, we ended up, we were playing at some theater called the Egyptian, which was a very old theater in Seattle. It actually went back to the 20s, where it was a Masonic temple. And we showed up for the premiere, and there's these lines around the block. And then we have now realized, because someone did some research, that at that hall where we premiered the film, Yogananda had spoken. 11 times he had been to that very place. So there's the sense that, you know, history was repeating itself, or this was an extension of what Yogananda himself was doing, you know, which is, and we've had, you know, we've been blessed with audiences really embracing this movie. And as you said, you know, seeing different layers in there. So wanting to go back 3, 4, 5 times to actually see things that they didn't see the first time. So, you know, it's playing now internationally in Germany and now Mexico. It played at the House of Lords in London, at the House of Lords, which is really ironic and interesting, that the Indian guru comes to the House of Lords. We are...
And they all watched that scene with the taking down of the Indian flag, or the taking down the British flag and putting the Indian flag. Everybody said it was a nail-biting moment, but some people clapped.
There's a way in which we certainly are humbled by what has happened to this film. It has exceeded what we had imagined by, you know, a factor of 10 or 100. And certainly it's really about Yogananda and his power and charisma, because we have seen in screenings, he is rocketing off the screen. It's like it's 3D. The movie, it feels like it's 3D because Yogananda is not back there. He's in the house. You know, he comes off the screen and people are feeling that, you know.
I think, go ahead, Lisa.
No, go ahead, Paula.
I was just going to say that I think any film, any documentary film being released in theaters, it's already a huge challenge, right? So there's so few that can actually make it into a theater, even in the U.S., which is probably one of the best places in the world to actually have a chance for a documentary. So we really didn't know whether this film was going to speak. I mean, it's a spiritual film. And it's deeply sort of, it could be considered religious by some, and that is just not very popular in the movie theaters, let's just face it. So I think we dipped our toe, you know, we went to New York, Los Angeles, we waited to see how it was going to be received, and it stayed for 7 weeks in New York. I mean, you know, for a film that just is going to even take a chance, sometimes it's 1 week. So for 7 weeks we stayed there, and then in Los Angeles it went another 7 weeks, and then for weekends it went on for 23 weeks. I mean, it was like one of the longest showing movies in Pasadena on the weekends. People were coming back to see it multiple times. So that, I mean, this kind of thing was something we could not be prepared for. And I think that what it has shown us, and then of course it went all over the country, but I think what it showed us is there is a hunger. People do want to find something deeper than what they're finding on the surface in life. And it's about how do we tell these stories. And we were lucky enough to premiere this film at a year where it was the first time that a festival was the Illuminate Film Festival in Sedona, Arizona, suddenly popped out of nowhere. And it's for conscious films. So that was the first of its kind in the United States. So I think that there is something happening now that is very small, very subtle, but I think that there is, it's encouraging people to make films like this.
If I may say one thing about, Yogananda was a visionary about how to communicate. And, in the 20s, he created mail order lessons for his teachings, which was remarkable and revolutionary, radical and brilliant. And he had this sort of way of seeing the cutting edge of communication. I mean, I think, airmail was brand new, which enabled that. And so it's kind of cool that this film now is being streamed. It's in all these different formats, theaters and DVDs, and being able to be streamed. And it seems like it's an extension. There you go. It's extending that technical edge. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, stand by for the virtual reality version of
That's in silence.
You have to buy an eyeball chip.
Exactly. And, well, finally, I also would like to ask you about what do you think it will be the future of this transcendent personage that is Paramahansa Yogananda. Not only because of this film, I'm just talking because of your personal experience, because of you have seen also the audience, how they receive the information, and maybe after the shows, they go with you and talk about something. So I would like you to explain something about this.
One thing that's amazing is that when we began this process, we were outsiders. We were not familiar with these teachings, and they wanted it that way. They wanted beginner's mind. They wanted people to come into these teachings and have that filter and that ability to create a story that was for the whole world. And so one of the things that we asked in one of our first meetings is, okay, let's just say hypothetically in 5 years or whatever, actually we thought in 2 years we have a movie, people go see the movie and they say, wow, that was really inspiring. I want to go get a TM mantra and start meditating. Is that a successful outcome? We asked this to the SRF organization and they said without hesitation, yes. It wasn't about selling SRF or Yogananda or the Guru or these teachings. It was about basically giving people a point of entry and a sort of an awakening to any path for God. And I think that this, the fact that there's not a sort of a preachiness to the film is really one of its strongest things, which is it allows you to experience the teachings and take away whatever you want. And as a benefit, though, it really has boosted Yogananda's prominence. We were told that in November, 25,000 copies of the autobiography were sold on Amazon. In November, this is a book from 70 years ago, is selling 25,000 copies in a single month. And the number of people who are signing up for SRF lessons has doubled. So clearly something is happening. People are saying, wow, this is powerful. This is, he is truly a teacher for the 21st century because he considered yoga, and as do many Indian swamis, it's a technology, it's a science, it's individual, and it's direct access. So there's something so alluring about that message for right now for so many of us.
Yeah, I think also he, in particular, says, "Don't take my word for it," right? So you don't listen to me. Just try these things and see what happens. And I think that speaks, like what Peter was saying, it speaks volumes about yoga, because yoga meets you wherever you are and has a way of taking you from exactly where you are to wherever you're ready to go. So you are the director of that trajectory. And that's what's so beautiful, and it's very democratic.
Mm-hmm. For you, Lisa?
I don't have much to add. Yeah, there's just an infinite potential. I mean, I think that's what I've learned from yoga, that there is infinite potential for transformation, transmutation, and it's just all about the practice. I had a teacher once, this isn't Yogananda, but I had a teacher once who said, you do your yoga and your yoga does you. And I found that to be true.
That's true. The thing that I wanted to ask you is about the reception that you had in the annual convention that the SRS had in LA. How was the experience in that when you showed the film?
Let's let Lisa go.
In some ways, I think for me I was the most nervous, to be screening for something like 3,000 or 5,000 devotees at once was a bit nerve-wracking, and it was incredible. I mean, we got up there and it was just a giant love fest. I mean, we felt, okay, I guess we got the guru story right. But I mean, 5,000, an overflow in 2 different rooms, 5,000 devotees was a bit overwhelming.
And it was a huge technical challenge to make it work on that scale, and it's interesting. We have noticed that, especially for devotees, the first time seeing the movie is a bit of a shock because they're not accustomed to seeing this narrative, this story in this form. We tell the story, in a different way. It's not like the autobiography. We focus on America and parts of the story that they don't know. So at first they're just shocked, and then they come back and they have a different experience, and maybe a third time they sort of really sink into the film. But for outsiders, it works as a story. It is the perfect kind of underdog story, a fish out of water. A 27-year-old Bengali who hardly speaks English comes to America and is going to teach us about Christianity. It's a great narrative, and we want everyone to see it.
But what Peter was saying is, you're triggering my memory. So the first couple of screenings for devotees, the lights would go up and it would be dead silence. And the 3 of us would look at each other and go, oh my gosh, did it work? Did it not work for this audience? But people had gone into meditation, which was quite beautiful.
Okay. Well, it was a great experience. I had the opportunity to be in there, and I can tell you that all the people was getting in tune with that energy. So thank you, and it was a great job that you do, and also Guru worked through you guys. So I hope they still keep working in this field, and thank you for this opportunity to talk.
Thank you.
I would like you to invite all the Spanish-speaking audience that get into the movie. Now it's something special because in Mexico it's going to show during these days, and also around the Spanish language we have the DVDs, Blu-rays, and some networks that also show the movie.
Go for it, Paula.
Sí, toda la gente, todas las personas vengan a mirar Awake, este film en los cines, en todos los mundos. Is that right? Is that okay? Do you want to make a correction?
Perfect. Peter, thank you very much. I think it was a whole challenge, but it's very an spiritual transformation also to find this experience in a professional way that touch your inner soul, right? So thank you, Peter. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Lisa, for this opportunity. And also I want to thank all the monks from YSS and also SRF that helped to do this interview. Thank you, because also with that environment we can develop these teachings in a professional experience, because that's like how life it needs to be worked, in a professional way, but not only in external, also in your inner soul. So thank you very much. And I don't know if you want to add something else.
Just please send loving pranams to all of the monks at YSS in Ranchi. Just tell them that we think of them, and it fills our hearts to think of you interviewing us from there.
And I would just say thank you and muchas gracias.
Información, nosotros vamos a continuar disfrutando y conociendo este viaje espiritual a través de la India.